With Tory poll numbers collapsing, Number 10 has a grand plan to win voters back, and they're calling it Operation Red Meat, unveiling policies like freezing the BBC licence fee to try to get their supporters back on side. In this week's magazine, Douglas Murray says he's not being fooled. After 11 years of Conservative rule, there's little to show for it. To discuss, he joins me on the show now. Douglas, as always, thank you for joining Spectator TV. You write in the magazine this week about Operation Red Meat, Boris Johnson's plan to save his premiership. Tell us what you make of it.
Yes, Operation Red Meat is the report that the Prime Minister is going to try to overcome the travails that he has gone through in recent weeks by throwing his voter base some red meat, some tough Tory policies that will hopefully dampen any leadership questions around him, dampen all of the discontent, and remind the great Conservative voter base of why they need Boris Johnson more than ever.
I've been looking at a lot of these policies, and they're around immigration, the BBC, as you say, real red meat for the base. Do you think it's working, or do you think he's just reminding his core base of what he hasn't done for 2.5 years?
Yeah, that's a very important point, exactly. See, as I say in the column, my own view is that there's no reason why, if you haven't done something from day one, you're suddenly going to start doing it in year 3. And I think the Conservative voters now, as with previous Conservative governments, are right to be sceptical about this. As you said, there's the BBC. What does it consist of so far? Nadine Dorries announcing this week that there'll be a freeze on the licence fee. Do you remember at the beginning of this government, we had talk of Charles Moore, no less, our own colleague, taking over as chairman of the BBC. They didn't manage with that. They didn't manage anything comparable. And we've got this, I wouldn't call it red meat. I'd call it rather plain fare of saying that we will have a freeze in the licence fee. I'm not sure, by the way, the BBC is a particularly good one to run on that. Actually, the BBC has, unlike, say, an American media, has a lot of discontents from both political sides, but has still got a significant amount of trust in the country, including among some or many Conservative voters. So I'm not sure that's the best one to go on. But yes, other red meat issues include, of course, immigration. Boris Johnson's now going to have to pretend that he's going to do something about an issue he hasn't done anything about for the last 2 years or more. He's going to have to talk tough on an issue which he'd hoped, clearly, as I said in the magazine once before, he'd hoped would sort of slide by beneath the radar. Boris Johnson's hope was that hundreds, and in the end more than 1,000 people coming illegally across the Channel every day, was just not going to be of significant enough interest to detain the attentions of the British people. He was wrong on that. But he still hasn't developed a policy. But we already see this week, again, a little bit of Operation Red Meat, perhaps. Talk of sending in the military to deal with the situation in the Channel, sending in the Royal Navy, the Army, perhaps the RAF in due course. I can't help smiling about this, of course, because it's so incredibly transparent. It's the sort of tough talk that some Conservatives like to engage in the hope that it'll almost sexually thrill their voters. And of course, actually, it doesn't. I think the Conservative voters are not what Boris Johnson thinks they are. I think they are, as I think he's making the same mistakes, I say in the column, that Theresa May made, which is when she got that rather disconcerting sense of disconnect from the voter base, suddenly makes the presumption that the Conservative voter base is both ugly and stupid.
Yep.
And I think they're neither. But Boris Johnson is going the same route. It's a great mistake.
You haven't always had such criticism for the Prime Minister. You once wrote that he was the only politician of his generation who can make people feel good. What do you think's changed?
I stick by that. I've always maintained that he has qualities that are almost unheard of in his generation, certainly unparalleled in his generation. It used to be the case, again, you might say the referendum took some of this out of it, but it used to be the case that if you mention Boris's name in the country, first of all, first name terms like Kylie, like Madonna, like other sort of celebrities, Boris always. If you say Boris's name to people, they say, Boris. There is a sort of lifting of the spirits, a sense of holiday. As I've said before, nobody ever said, Theresa. No one ever said, John, good old John Major. It never happened. Point is that Boris had an unusual quality in politics. But, as I mentioned in this week's column, that seems to have faded. I'm reminded of the case of Michael Barrymore after the body was found in his pool. It wasn't that Michael Barrymore's talent disappeared. It wasn't that we didn't still remember that he was a man capable of making us laugh. It's just that the laughter died. And something similar has happened in recent weeks and days with Boris Johnson. It's the period in which the laughter has died. We know that he was once able to entertain, but the question remains over whether he can govern. And some people would say that the answer to that question is now in.
Well, I'm curious as to what you would say, Douglas. I think it's quite clear that you are disappointed with where his premiership has taken the country so far. I think it's a damning but very revealing point that you make, that the laughter has died. And once the laughter dies, that's when you know things are really very grim. Do you think it's time that he threw in the towel?
Well, it's very interesting watching the stunt, which is the best way to put it, of what David Davis did at Prime Minister's Questions this week. A very striking thing to do, of actually calling for the Prime Minister's resignation in the House of Commons on his own benches. Some people would say, well, that's David Davis being David Davis. However, it's a serious advance, really, in the movement of dissatisfaction within the Conservative Party. Here's the thing that will keep Boris Johnson in place for the time being. It simply isn't clear that there is any obvious successor. Now, members of the Conservative Party and others who I speak to say to me, well, Douglas, it was the same before. Nobody ever arrived in office fully formed. Even the greats like Margaret Thatcher didn't arrive into office fully formed as Margaret Thatcher. So you always take a bit of a risk on it, as it were, with a leader. Here's the problem, though. It's very hard to see how the Conservatives could, first of all, engage in a leadership battle at this stage. If they're going to do it, they should do it soon, by the way. I mean, there's no point in doing this, say, a year before the election. But the first thing is that in any case, is the country really up for another Conservative Party leadership contest? There is this pretense that the Conservative Party is this brutally efficient machine, but anyone who's seen it up close knows that it's much more like a sausage-making factory. You really don't want to see how it works up close. And the second thing is, of course, is there a successor? And I would say at the moment that the answer to that is very clearly no. There is no obvious successor to Boris Johnson. There are many impressive people around him, and indeed on his benches, I would say. The Conservative Party has a significant amount of talent, including talent from recent intakes. It's a very striking contrast with the Labour Party, where effectively, if you go below the level of Keir Starmer, you get to just an extraordinary array of people, some of whom you can't believe are allowed out in public, let alone into the House of Commons. But it's a different level of talent on the Conservative benches. They have got very significant, talented figures. However, are any of them yet in a position, first of all, to take over the reins of the most important office in the land, and secondly, to either keep or grow that important electoral advance that Boris Johnson did make in 2019? Can anyone honestly say that Rishi Sunak, for instance, is going to satisfy crucial voters in the Red Wall? I'm not sure about that. Are any of the other contenders? None of them spring to mind. So I think for the time being, it's likely that Johnson will hold on simply because it's not clear what the alternative is. There is no king or queen over the water. There is no person absolutely ready to step forward. But, as I say, that doesn't rule out the possibility that there might be a challenge because, of course, never forget that there's an important rule in politics, which is only one thing unites every single member of the House of Commons. And that is the belief, misguided though it almost always is, that at some point history will call and it'll be them.
Douglas, while I have you here, let me ask you one more question. Going past Boris Johnson and his 2.5 years in office and looking more generally at the Conservative Party, what do you make of their now 11 years in power? Somehow they've had control that long, and yet we've ended up with the biggest tax burden in 71 years.
Yes, there's really only one selling point that the Conservatives have after 11 years of Conservative majority government. And that is this: they haven't been Labour. And that's it. That's almost the sum total of their abilities and their boasts to date. Now, of course, we had the 5 years of the coalition government, and David Cameron and co could always say, well, we had this ball and chain around our ankles called the Liberal Democrat Party, specifically Nick Clegg. That is a significant ball and chain to have to suffer along with as you shuffle through the business of government. But then there was a period in which David Cameron did have a majority. There was a period where Theresa May had a majority. She, of course, blew a majority, but we still had a Conservative majority government. We now have a situation with Boris Johnson for, as I say, over 2 years, where we have not just an 80-seat Tory majority, but also a crisis that he could have used. And at the end of that crisis, and that 80-seat majority, as I say in the column, and as you well know, the question is, have we been governed by Conservatives? And the answer really is no. We've been governed by not Labour. We've been governed by not Corbyn. We have historic levels of public borrowing. We have tax rises, national insurance rises, with the old trick, the old Gordon Brown trick of pretending that a national insurance rise isn't really a tax rise. All of the things we've seen many times before. And what is the one flagship policy of this government? COP26. The promise that if we try hard enough, we won't have any electricity by the end of the decade. The promise that our electricity bills, our fuel bills are all going to keep rising, all to get to an unsustainable, impossible goal. So the one thing that we have really got in policy terms from Boris Johnson in his prime ministership so far is greenery. A sort of, particularly in my form, ridiculous form of greenery. As I say in my column this week, we voted Conservative as a country in 2019, and we got the member for Brighton Pavilion. That is, of course, Caroline Lucas. So that's the problem. The Conservative voter base will feel, as they often do, completely let down by a Conservative government. Conservative governments are masters at letting down their own publics, their own voters. But, as I say, we'll end up always with this question, who else? And I would expect, by the way, as I mentioned in the column, that Operation Red Meat will also include a significant dollop of, you thought Jeremy Corbyn was bad, wait till you see what Comrade Keir Starmer would do if he was in office. I'm not sure that that's a threat that the natural voter base of the Conservative Party, let alone the wider country, is going to be all that terrified about in due course.
Well, there you have it, viewers. Douglas Murray's take on the not Labour Party. Douglas, as always, thanks for joining us.